Obviously, the federal budget came out, so we're just going to have a bit of a talk about one part of the federal budget, which is the defense spending. Okay, so as you can see here, the defense budget increases to $44.6 billion. We're going to have a little bit of a talk about this, and I'm going to speculate in relation to why there could be some certain increases in some certain areas. And of course, as you know at home, you are more than welcome to put your thoughts in the comment sections below. It's not just about what I think, it's also about what you think. So let's have a look at what we've got here. Okay, so this is coming from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Defence budget climbs to $44.6 billion. I'm going to read to you a little bit here, and then we'll put it into a little bit of context. Okay, so this is an increase on 2020 to 2021 of 6.1% in nominal terms and 4.1% in real terms. So real terms referring to adjustment for currency, the state of the economy, wages, cost of living, etc., those types of factors. So the 4.1% is the metric that you need to be paying the most attention to. It says here the defence budget is continuing its solid growth. In 2021 budget, the government was planning a huge $3 billion. That's a 27% increase in defence's acquisition budget from $12.2 billion to $14.3. Now, defense had only achieved roughly 5% increases in preceding years. Defense has come up with $1.6 billion short, but a big part of that can be accounted for by significant foreign exchange adjustments that reduce the acquisition budget. Okay, so of course, if the Australian dollar becomes stronger, it means that more equipment can be purchased for a lower dollar value, right? As the Australian dollar strengthens, so that's the point just there. Defence still exceeded its 2019 to 20 achievement by more than 1.4 billion, and that represents a 12.9% growth. Goes on to say, defence hasn't yet provided us with the split between local and overseas spending for 20 to 21 and 21 to 22, but it will be interesting to see if Australian defence industries is finally managing to absorb more of the acquisition budget than its historical 1/3 share. In other words, we need to look at whether or not the government is bringing back local strategic manufacturing for defence purposes. Okay, and that could be in relation to anything from military hardware to uniforms. It says here, that will be crucial to boosting sovereign industry and military capability and mitigating supply chain risks. Okay, so mitigating supply chain risks, essentially, we need to be able to equip our military with what they need, and that should not be dependent on international supply chains. Okay, if our military needs equipment, we should not be dependent on China to be supplying that equipment. We should be completely self-reliant when it comes to strategic manufacturing. Of course, we see tensions with China rising. Okay, so why would it make sense to have our military manufacturing supply lines based in China when it's very well China that we will need to be defending ourselves from potentially in the very near future? It says here, as operations in the Middle East wind down, the cost of operations is the lowest it's been since before the 1999 East Timor intervention. Okay, where of course Indonesia invaded East Timor and we had to get involved. And so what did we do since then? We give hundreds of millions of dollars per year in foreign aid to Indonesia. Okay, they buy attack helicopters, we train their military, and now Indonesia and China are engaging in joint naval operations within our immediate geographical region. What could possibly go wrong? It goes on to say, going down from 751.4 million in 2020 to 2021 to a predicted 271.5 million in 21 to 22, taking into account that 136.2 million of that in 2020 to 21 was Operation COVID Assist. Okay, so our government spending a lot of money on COVID operations, as you've seen, of course, at times even using the uniform of our army members for things like border closures and so forth. Okay, so we're going to have a little bit of a look at the breakdown of spending for the defence budget here. So this is coming from federal member Andrew Hastie. This was an email that Andrew Hastie sent out to his email subscribers. It says here, the Morrison government has restored defence funding to 2% of GDP in 2020. Defence now has a 10-year funding model of 575 billion over the next decade, 2029 to 30. So the question we need to be asking ourselves here, is this going to be enough for the potential future threats faced by Australia? It says here that includes a $270 billion investment in the capability and potency of the ADF. We have a $183 billion naval ship building plan, the largest regeneration of the Navy since World War II, with more than 70 vessels being built in Australia. 37 of our 72 F-35A strike fighters have been delivered, with more than 10,000 hours already flown. We are developing a new missile defense capability and modernizing our land forces with 211 new combat reconnaissance vehicles, self-propelled howitzers, new helicopters, and more. The budget also builds investment into our intelligence security agencies, hardening our cyber resilience. And of course, we've seen multiple cyber attacks over the years, attacks on our on the Australian Bureau of Meteorology, and also our defence as well. And I think that it's probably fair to say that our defence data should not be stored in Chinese databases over in China, and that could be a question that should be addressed by the Prime Minister, I would say. All right, so that's a little bit of a breakdown there. Now, to put that in perspective, Andrew Hastie talks about restoring defence funding to 2% of GDP. So the question that we perhaps need to be asking ourselves is that enough? And should we look at reconfiguring the budget to bolster this 2% to a higher figure in order to address what could very much be an impending threat posed by the largest military population in the world, which of course is the Chinese military. Okay, so just to show you some figures right here. Okay, this is coming from Statista.com. Military expenditure as percentage of gross domestic product in high spending countries 2020. So Saudi Arabia coming in at place number 1 at 8.4%, Israel at number 2 with 5.6%, Russia, United States, India, South Korea, France, and then Australia coming in at 2.1 for 2020. Okay, now it's important to point out that the military expenditure you can interpret essentially as an indication of the threat perceived by that particular country. Okay, so we see Saudi Arabia there coming in at place number 1. Their biggest adversary is Iran, and Iran, of course, has various proxies that circumvent Saudi Arabia, Yemen being one of them, of course. So the 8.4% there, you could not necessarily, could interpret as an indication of the perceived threat considered by the Saudi Arabian government, and the 5.6% there at Israel could also be considered as what the government considers to be a perceived threat from around their borders. Russia, United States, India, and it goes down the list from there. Okay, so what do you think at home? Do you feel comfortable with 2% of our GDP going towards defense? Do you think it should be more? Do you think it should be less? Put your thoughts in the comments. Of course, China's media mouthpiece, as we mentioned on the MCJ report, threatens long-range missile strikes on Australian soil. Okay, so we've known for a long time that China is bolstering their military. We've seen the militarization of the South China Sea, all the naval patrols, the provocative activity, invading the exclusive economic zones of many other countries, whether it's Taiwan, Japan, Vietnam, Philippines, and now, of course, the Chinese Communist Party through their media outlet, which is nothing more than as it says here, a mouthpiece for the government, has threatened to actually strike Australia with long-range missiles. Okay, so I think Andrew Hastie actually spoke here about missile defense. Now, is he speaking in relation to China and their threats of long-range missiles? Why would Australia need missile defense, ladies and gentlemen? For what other reason, apart from China, would we need missile defense? That's a question I pose to you. It seems pretty clear that China is keen on this idea. Now, what we do know is that over in Vietnam, they're actually investigating a potential missile base near its border. That's right. So Vietnamese authorities have detected something they consider to be a missile base, a little bit too close for comfort, and they're making investigations to determine whether it is what they concerned it might be. All right, so hypothetically speaking, if China was to develop a missile base in Indonesia or maybe Papua New Guinea, that would pose some serious security concerns for Australia, and of course we'd be best being prepared for that type of scenario, taking into account that sooner or later we're probably going to have to stand on our 2 feet. It's possible that the United States will not always be there to have our back in a military confrontation. So I think the best preparation is to be over-prepared. What do you guys think at home? I would much prefer to be over-prepared, to have security above and beyond, but to have the comfort of knowing that it's there. Just like they say, it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. All right, so let's see, moving on here. So this is a concern, right? China proposing to build a $39 billion super city in Daru, which is right near the most northerly point of Queensland, perhaps with ambitions of converting that into some sort of military base or outpost, like what the CCP developed in Djibouti over in Africa, or the military bases in the South China Sea. Okay, so that right there would be in perfect striking distance of Australia, nice and easy for the Chinese Communist Party. We know that China and Indonesia are also holding joint naval patrols around Jakarta. Okay, so this is all in very close proximity to Australia. And we see ramping up of our defense budget, defense against missiles, okay? China threatening to strike Australia with missiles. It's really heating up a lot. And it will be interesting to see how this plays out and whether or not we get into a full-blown war with China. What do you think about that? Put your thoughts in the comments. So to put the threat in perspective, the super city that China is proposing to build is right there in Daru, and there is the most northerly point of Queensland. I believe it's about 200 kilometers. All right, so striking distance. There's Jakarta right over there, Indonesia. So we've got joint Chinese and Indonesian naval exercises, and keep in mind that we actually helped train the Indonesian Navy. Foreign aid, hundreds of millions of dollars per year. What does it get us in the end? China, of course, brings the Belt and Road Initiative to Indonesia, has deep commercial interest in Indonesia's copper and nickel, and wants to turn Indonesia into an electric vehicle manufacturing hub. And of course, we see the COVID-19 vaccine diplomacy relations between Indonesia and China, both Indonesia and China being very authoritarian countries, and now the military cooperation. So I dare say it's a threat that we need to be taking very seriously, and we seem to see elements of that addressed in the military budget. I just question if it's enough, or if we really need to look at maybe making adjustments in the budget down the line in order to direct additional funds into the military. Maybe there's some parts of the budget you read through and you think, well, hey, maybe we shouldn't be spending so much money on A, B, and C. If you do, why don't you go ahead and put that in the comments? Alrighty. Alright, so that wraps it up for this part of the show, the defense budget. So again, mcjreport.com, go to the website, put your email address in, and I'll send you all the sources, all the links that I use in the show, and you can subscribe. And hey, if I get kicked off Facebook, that means we can always stay in touch.